going to record. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us at the NN Journal election hustings. We really appreciate you all coming along. Thank you to everyone that has submitted questions over the last few days. We've had some really great questions come in and we've selected as many of those as possible, and we hope to get as many of those to the candidates this evening. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to their question, and we will give them a 20-second warning towards the end of their time slot. Joining us on the panel, we have candidates from each of the main parties in North Northamptonshire, except for the Conservative Party. Unfortunately, they have decided not to join us. They were invited, unfortunately they declined that offer, and it is our understanding that they won't be taking part in any hustings in North Northamptonshire in the run-up to the election on May the 6th. But we do have candidates from the other parties. So we have Chris Stanbra from the Liberal Democrats, Jean Addison from the Labour Party, Jim Hakewill from who's an independent candidate, and Dez Dell from the Green Party. Before we start on the questions, if you could all perhaps just introduce yourself just very briefly, just to give us a little bit more information about you. Perhaps Chris, you could start, please.
Hello everybody, my name's Chris Stanbra. I'm a Liberal Democrat councillor on Northamptonshire County Council, as was, now North Northamptonshire Council, standing for election on May the 6th and hoping to be re-elected. I live in Corby on the Danesholme estate. I'm 62 years old, married, 2 children who are grown up. I've got 2 grandchildren. I was born in Essex, but don't hold that against me. And I love Corby. It's a fantastic place.
Thank you. Jean?
Thank you. I'm Jean Addison. I've lived in Corby since about 1970. I've got 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. I don't look that old, do I? But I retired as a nurse at Kettering General probably about 7 years ago now, and I've been a borough councillor for Corby since 2003. My role at the end of the council, I was deputy leader.
Thank you. Jim?
So I'm Jim Hakewill. I'm the 7th generation of my family to live in Braybrook, and all of those generations lived in the same house, in fact. Married to Christine, 3 children and 6 grandchildren, 3 of whom live literally next door to me through a connecting door. I've been a councillor on Kettering Borough, or had been a councillor on Kettering Borough since 1987, on Braybrook Parish for a while, Rothwell Town and the County Council. Love Formula 1 motor racing and love this area like all the other candidates, and looking forward to continuing to represent people. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Des?
Hi everybody, I'm Dez Dell. I have never been a councillor before, but I am hoping to become one. I'm with the Green Party. Over the last few years, I've become more and more interested in local politics and community activism, especially. From volunteering roles I've done to being really active over the last year with regard to the Save Weekly Hall Wood campaign, loads of other stuff I do. I just like to keep myself really busy, and I think there's a real need for fresh voices on the council, so I really hope to be elected so I can actually make more of a difference in my community. I'm from Kettering.
From Kettering, yeah. Thank you, Des. So as we said, all the questions that are asked tonight have come in from our readers at the NN Journal. We'll get onto those shortly. Just to say also, at the end of the session, we're hoping to have about 10 minutes where we can put questions to you that have come through during the evening. So for people watching, there should be a Q&A box where questions can be submitted while we're chatting, and we'll try and get to as many of those at the end of the session. So the first question that's come in from one of our readers says, the number of children living in poverty in Corby is 3 times higher than the number in South Northamptonshire. Why do you think that is, and what do you plan to do about it? Jean, could we start with you on this one, please?
Sorry, that famous unmute business. Yes, I think nationally, child poverty and the level of deprivation has increased over the past decade, mainly due to the unnecessary austerity measures brought in by the Tory government. This, of course, has been exacerbated in the last 12 months with the pandemic, where people on low wages have been furloughed or have lost their jobs. It's well known that Corby, along with other post-heavy industrial towns, have for decades had high levels of both health and poor health and child deprivation, and both of these go hand in hand. However, we must change the public perception about what child poverty means. It's not the Tory stereotypical picture of a feckless family sitting around on state benefits, smoking, drinking, and watching their big TVs. It's about families that are on low income, maybe doing 2 jobs, maybe on 0-hour contracts. And it's people that are unable to work due to ill health, or they're caring for their loved ones. Most low-wage families become very skillful at managing on a week-to-week, on a low budget, until a crisis occurs, such as the rent or council tax increases, a school trip to fund, or they may need a new oven or a new fridge. These things, they don't have the resources to fall back on. And that may lead them to resort to payday loans, for example, which can then set off the downward spiral of debt. What do we plan to do about it? We will work proactively, not reactively. Prevention is better than cure. By putting early interventions in, we can support families so that they do not fall further into the poverty trap. That's why we support funding of the children's centres and voluntary organisations such as Home Start, and those that support carers. Research has shown early intervention works and is cost effective in the long term, helping to reduce antisocial behaviour and juvenile crime, for example, further down the line. By taking initiatives to lift people, for instance, out of pure poverty, sourcing grants, etc., as we've done in Corby, enabling us to put solar panels on our properties where appropriate.
Jean, sorry, your time's up. You've probably got a few seconds left. And
that's fine. I could talk about this all night.
Thank you, Jean. Jim, would you like to go next?
Thank you, and thank you to whoever asked the question. There are multiple reasons for the position that the two diverse areas find themselves in. Corby historically, was a tiny village, and then the steelworks came along, and is very much a manual working area, although clearly in latter years since the steelworks closed, there's much more diversity in the economy. South Northamptonshire is a wealthy rural area on the M40 near to Oxford and Birmingham and London even, and therefore a different demographic. My belief is that the council's job is to help balance out those issues, and where we take council tax across the whole area, we need to look at where there are places where people need to have greater help than others in that way. So I already oppose the massive increase in council tax support imposed by the shadow unitary council, which is really going to hit Corby residents. And I think it was so unfair, and it could have been done over a couple of years, not immediately. Being independent means that I don't have to play follow my leader of a political party. So in things that in my heart are not right, I don't have to support. I'll look and scrutinise policies and services and join with any councillor in this forum or across the new council, should I be elected, to look at, scrutinise and find out services and ways in which we can support those that are less well off, are more in need of help, and obviously maintain the environment for those that don't need those services. I'll also look and listen at other councils across the country where they have similar issues, similar diverse communities, and just go and talk to them and find out how they solved some of those problems. I think copying other people is a great way of going forward. I don't have to know the answers, none of us do, but if you find someone who's found an answer, that's the way forward. So as an independent, I'll work with anyone who seeks to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Des, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. I'm not entirely sure that the two locations are comparable. Corby's got a population density 7 times that of South Northamptonshire. But what Corby does have is an enviable community spirit, as proven with the amazing mutual aid networks that pulled together last year. And even before that, a friend of mine, Liam Ferguson, started the Sharing the Kindness Facebook group, which currently stands at over 22,000 members, for which he won the Spirit of Corby Award. That award, which was recently won in a cause close to my heart by the litter-picking Corby Wombles, who have cleaned up Corby streets and green spaces magnificently. But to answer the question, very many people have been affected by the pandemic, have lost their jobs and been failed by universal credit and cuts to children's services and healthcare. The best way to get rid of child poverty is to increase household income, and a national green policy is one of UBI. Universal basic income would replace the unwieldy and expensive benefit system, with everyone being given an unconditional payment. In trials abroad, it's proven to lift people out of poverty, improve mental health and reduce stress due to the financial security it offers. Other cities, including Manchester, Liverpool and Hull, have looked at running UBI trials, and if elected as a Green Party councillor, I would push for North Northamptonshire to take part in the Universal Basic Income trial. The new unitary is a chance to really make a new start, and we need fresh ideas to go with that.
Thank you, Des. Chris?
Thank you very much. So the reason, undoubtedly, why Corby has 3 times the number of children living in poverty as South Northamptonshire is wealth. South Northamptonshire is a very wealthy part of Northamptonshire. The job opportunities are much better down there than they are up here, and that's something we need to address, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But there's lots of other things we can do. We really need to properly support the voluntary sector and community groups that reach right into our communities and can deliver results much better than the council can. And we have the new council has to find a way to work with them properly and resource them properly. We need to work with places like Pen Green here in Corby, who do a fantastic job for their community, an absolutely superb facility. And I don't see why we can't work with them to do similar things in other parts of North Northamptonshire. Looking at council-owned properties, I'm also very much a fan of solar panels or other such similar things, some sort of micro generation to be retrofitted to council homes so that council tenants can benefit from reduced utility bills as a result, and possibly even sell electricity back to the grid and maybe have a negative electricity bill. That will put money back into their pockets straight away. We need to build more council houses. We can't have people paying out private rentals which are way in excess of social rentals. Let's build the council houses we need so that everyone on the waiting list can have a council house. Over 1,000 families just here in Corby want a council house. It's a big ask, but why don't we try and do it? We need to properly support those people on universal credit who are having trouble paying their council tax due to the 3-fold increase they've had to suffer here in Corby, with a proper discretionary fund that they can access to get the help if they need it. Des mentioned UBI, Universal Basic Income, also a Lib Dem policy, and the Liberal Democrat group, should there be one on the new council, would absolutely support putting North Northamptonshire forward as a trial. But perhaps most importantly, we need to attract well-paid, better jobs to Corby, more jobs to Corby. That's the way you move people out of poverty, by increasing their income. And the council has a huge job to do to bring companies to the area so that those jobs are here for the people who live here. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. So our next reader asks, they say, good public transport systems along with safer walking and cycling infrastructure would help to move towards a less car-dependent society. This has clear benefits for all in terms of health, congestion, air quality and the climate emergency. Some of the changes will require investment and some require a change in attitude. Would you support measures to increase the levels of active, sustainable travel? And if so, which measures would you support? Perhaps Des, you could start us off on this one.
Yes. As part of the community group Northampton Streets for All, which was set up last year, I know how important this is and would love to see the 2,000 public comments on the Northampton County Council Commonplace Survey used to inform decisions across the north of the county. Moving to active travel is essential. Between 2009 and 2019, we in Northamptonshire increased our number of car miles driven by nearly 1 billion, and transport is the UK's biggest contributor to CO2 emissions. Not only that, but 347 people were killed or seriously injured on our roads in 2019. And the health benefits are important. People who actively travel to work take 27% less sick days, so it's good for business as well. Active travel needs to absolutely be encouraged, as it has obvious benefits across the board, but our infrastructure needs improvement. As someone who has had their bones rattled on our roads, on my bike and on the electric scooters, I can attest that we need to adopt the government mobility lane standards as set out in LTN 120. This is being looked at in Kettering, but needs to be across the entirety of North Northamptonshire. I look forward to the result of the trial School Street in Wellingborough, during which the street is closed to traffic during the school run, which has the added benefits of reducing congestion, which obviously reduces air pollution from exhaust fumes to which children are especially susceptible, and means the street is safer and kids can walk, cycle and scoot to school. And while reducing the reliance on car use in our towns, it's essential we don't forget the reliance of those rural areas that are not serviced by regular buses. We need those bus routes back.
Thanks, Des. Chris, would you like to go next?
Certainly, yes. So absolutely would support measures to increase the levels of active sustainable travel. I think one that we could look at straight away is increasing the number of cycle lanes across our area so that people can cycle safely. Mainly in urban areas, it has to be said, but I don't see why we can't look at some of our main routes through North Northamptonshire, like the road from Oundle up to Peterborough, for instance, to see if we can provide safer cycling facilities there. Corby's ideally placed because of our layout, perhaps for cycle lanes. Other urban areas in the north maybe less so because they are older and not necessarily been laid out as Corby was as a new town. But you know, we have to do something. Bus travel is another one. We've got to make bus travel more attractive. We've got to make people actually want to use the buses. Too many people use cars when they perhaps could use a bus. So what do we need to do? How about lower fares? I know that costs money. I'd be looking to government to help us out there. Evening services that don't exist in some places at the moment. I think the council could even consider piloting for a period of time a free or almost free bus service, maybe as a circular route around some of our towns, to see whether that has an effect on bus use. And Des is absolutely right. Villages, some of them are just being completely cut off. The only method of transport you can use now is a car, and if you haven't got a car, then you are isolated. So let's see if we can bring bus services back to some of our villages. The question specifically asks about a blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on urban and village roads. I wouldn't support that personally. I don't think it would be enforced anyway, so would probably be ignored. There is a case for 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in certain places, like around schools and so on, but just blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, I don't think are things that we should be considering.
Thanks, Chris. Jean?
Thank you. In answer to the question, would I support? The answer is yes. And I will, and I have supported this sort of measure. I lobbied for electric charging points, which, whilst it took far too long, nearly 4 years for the Borough Council, Kettering, to get them installed, they're now becoming more available for more sustainable transport. Government has regularly announced funding for sustainable public transport with great hurrahs and so on, but local political leadership hasn't taken up the opportunities offered. I'll push for more innovative ways to deliver improved public transport, particularly based around electric technology and other low carbon power sources as they come along. We have such an innovative country in terms of creating and designing better modes of transport. I've owned and driven an electric car for the last 2.5 years. I think councillors should practice what they preach. I think I'm the only one who has a completely electric car. I live in an eco-built house and I have a very low carbon footprint with my family. A little unlike Chris, I very much agree with 20 miles per hour enforced by designing roads to keep traffic slow. I represent the village of Maudsley, which is a total 20-mile-an-hour limit, and that really is a helpful way of keeping people safe. And it also means that if you're cycling and walking, you can feel safer under the 20, and especially around schools. That should be enforced too. Through villages, and I represent Rushden, and right across North Northamptonshire, the village of Rushden in the morning with the school has massive amounts of traffic going through. And there are two issues. One is the volume, and the other is the speed at which traffic travels through those villages. And you'll find every division in North Northamptonshire has villages or routes where traffic is a risk to residents. Given our climate, I warmed to Dez's point about cycling, but I can't see someone like me cycling from Braybrook to Kettering to a council meeting in 3 inches of snow. So my answer there is that we must have comfortable public transport and bring those routes back. And it will need subsidy to get people to want to take that opportunity. I tried at KBC to put in a grant process to try and help local communities get bus services going again. Just £5,000, a budget of 20,000 for the year. The Conservatives at that time rejected it. I think that was very, very short-sighted, because people will club together, as they have in Maudsley, to get a community bus running. And it doesn't have to be hourly every day, 24/7.
Jim, your time's up now.
So
Thank you.
Lots of information and surveys. What we need to do is do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Jean?
Well, yes, why wouldn't we support more activity and sustainable travel for our residents? It has so many benefits, not only in air quality, but also in enabling people to get fit. The problem is the government promises all this, but they don't come up with the goods at the end of the day. We need to work with our community and ensure that we do have bus services that reach out to the villages. At the moment, Gretton hasn't got a bus service at all. We need to be working with the bus companies, etc., to ensure there is a good service, because people are cut off, especially if you haven't got your own transport, and you can't take up the things that are on offer in the town centre. You can't get to the doctor's surgery, etc., unless you pay for a taxi. I would be in favour of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, especially around schools and residential homes, etc., because there's so many accidents happen, and so the death rates on our roads is increasing, not decreasing. And we would also bring back speed cameras, which wouldn't be very popular, I know, but it's a necessity, I think. And yes, we do need to increase cycleways, and I don't think I can add anything else to what people have already said without repeating them.
Thanks, Jean. So our next reader asks, what's more important, building new houses in North Northamptonshire or protecting our green spaces and nature? Jim, do you want to start us off on this one?
Certainly, thank you. I don't think you can identify one as being more important than the other. So the two can't really be separated. I've helped people and families who have found themselves in desperately difficult situations, facing the prospect of being homeless, with families, with children being taken away from their peer groups and away from the areas where they've lived in order to find suitable housing. So we absolutely do need new housing, and a good percentage of that does need to be affordable. And they also need to be well built with some of the things we've already mentioned. It's not always the cost of building the house, but the cost of running it for families that particularly are in need and perhaps can't make ends meet. Green spaces are amazingly beneficial for exercise and have significant mental health benefits. So for me, in answering this question, I'm going to say that both are important. You can't separate them. But the key is also to protect the most significant ecological areas and to make sure when building new homes, people have easy, ideally walking, cycling access to the countryside, and that countryside is kept in a good state and in a safe and accessible state. So in that point, the new council will have responsibility for parks, footpaths and bridleways, and I'll push for joined up thinking when considering planning applications to ensure that everyone has access to green spaces, but equally that where we can, we build on brownfield land so that those green spaces are less used than they perhaps have been in the past. So very much so, but the two go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Des?
The two things are not mutually exclusive. We can build more affordable housing while also protecting our green spaces and nature. It's obvious with the amount of campaign groups that have sprung up over the last years that the residents of our county care deeply about our green spaces. From inappropriate developments of Weekly Hall Wood, of which I'm a part of that community group, the Desborough Protect the Eyes Valley group, the Say No to Warmington Quarry, Save the Glebe Land, Friends of Fineshade and the Save the Fletton Field in Oundle, as well as the anti-incinerator Camp Brookfield in Corby. It's obvious that the new council needs to engage more with communities around environmental issues and concerns. The local plan needs an overhaul and reassessment, as even those areas classified as brownfield decades ago, such as old quarries, and now thrive in nature-rich havens and have fantastic amenity value to residents nearby. If those so-called brownfield sites were reassessed and protected, then we would not have seen the felling of 1,000 trees in Corby last year, with no recompense from the developer who destroyed that biodiversity with not a thought for the damage to the climate, ecosystems or wildlife. And I would not be fighting the speculative warehousing application as part of the Save Weekly Hall Wood team, as those sites would have stricter controls and be protected. Derelict sites in towns can and should be developed for housing, and more affordable housing needs to be built. Those houses that are built should be to full passive house standards, as although energy efficiency building regulations were lowered in 2015, according to the Royal Institute of Town Planners, no commencement date for repealing those powers was ever given. So local authorities still have the power to set those standards to make housing as energy efficient as possible. And bearing in mind that the government has banned installation of gas boilers by 2025, developers must adapt and install renewable solutions such as air or ground source heat pumps, proper insulation and solar panels on every new build. Green spaces and housing can coexist and will have to, because we cannot keep releasing carbon and contributing to the climate crisis by destroying our incredibly valuable green spaces.
Thank you. Jean?
Thank you. Nobody wants to build on green spaces or on green land, but the government have demanded that we build new houses, and we have to show that we do have a land supply for the next 5 years. However, land is not infinite. We can't conjure up more land. We have to find a compromise somewhere. We have to work with the developers, as already been said, to build sustainable properties and affordable housing for our residents. And we also have to ensure that there is a provision for wildlife and green spaces in those developments. Corby, as you know, is very proud of its woodlands and green spaces, although it will not always meet the number of houses the government requires us to build. We need to look at innovative ways to bring empty properties back into use, as already been said by Des. In Corby, we've recently converted derelict garages. We've taken over the lease of Neville House from a housing association and refurbished 12 masonettes to a very high standard. And we've also converted office space within the town centre. It's a difficult question, but people need homes, and I don't know what the answer is. We've got to build homes somewhere, and if not on green space, I don't know where else we can go.
Thank you, Jean. Chris?
Thanks. Yes, so both are equally important and they're not mutually exclusive. We can protect many green spaces, but we can also have new homes. Guarantee to protect all green spaces, because if we want homes for our children and grandchildren to live in, some of them will have to be newly built, and some of those will have to be on greenfield sites. Some of those will be private developments and some of them will be council houses. I hope that the new council will be building a lot of council houses. What we can't have in communities is developments imposed by developers who are building for profit, where there is no need for the type of property that's being built. We need to have the properties built that people want to live in, the houses we need where we need them. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question says, what is the one thing you can say with certainty that you will do quickly that will improve the quality of life and well-being of residents in North Northamptonshire? Chris, I know you just finished, but if you could go first on that one, please.
Well, more than one thing. So immediate action on climate change. We will put £200,000 on the table on the first day of the new council to kickstart action on the scrutiny report on climate change that was brought forward recently. Immediate action to retrofit council houses with things like solar panels or other micro generation. Immediate action on greening the council, reducing the number of vehicles the council has that don't use electric power. Immediate action to support universal credit claimants with their council tax. Immediate action to build more council houses, and immediate action to plant trees and tackle air pollution. So lots of things that we can do on day one to improve the quality of life and well-being of residents of North Northamptonshire.
Thank you. Jim?
Thank you. I will promote better working between the different groups of councillors so that time is not wasted on politics and the save time to engage with our communities. Improving the quality of life and well-being must start with understanding what our communities think and what they think will improve our lives. Immediately, I will get the recommendations of the Climate Change Scrutiny Group embedded into the new council's policies. I'm proud to have seconded the climate emergency with Chris Stanbra here at NCC, and I moved that climate emergency with Councillor Anne Lee at KBC. That's 3 different party groups, all as one, and fortunately they were all unanimously agreed. Those emergencies have been declared and are already changing people's minds in the councils, but we need to do more. I would like to see a citizens panel set up quickly as a positive, meaningful way of gathering the issues concerning people and the ever-changing mood and aspirations of our communities. I would love to say that with certainty, but it will require all party support. In setting up the North Northamptonshire Council, dozens of meetings have taken place in private. No agendas, no minutes, no access to the wider membership, to those scrutiny panels. So immediately I will be questioning why anything other than the most specific things have to be discussed in private. And I'll also be, and I would say this, wouldn't I, but both with Sarah and Natalie, local media is crucial to the scrutiny of local government. And it's sad we lost a daily paper, because at the point when I was leader at Kettering, I have to say I always picked up the daily paper to look and see what the story was about and whether or not that was something we should do. So in my opinion, the first thing to do is to get that climate change embedded, to get a citizens panel engaged so that we can gather all the information from all the residents about what they think is best for North Northamptonshire in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Jean?
It's always difficult going last because everybody's had the opportunity to say what you wanted to say. Yes, climate, most definitely. And we would look to set up a climate resource centre so that we can find out the best practices in this country and in other countries for dealing with climate change, and put in place things. in the council, you know, look at the buildings that we have and how we can better future-proof those for climate change. I'd like to just add a little bit to the list from that, because that is the priority, but there's smaller things. It's not always the big ticket things that can improve people's lives. It's the smaller things, like making libraries accessible for people, because libraries are community hubs, and improving street lighting in a sustainable way, because people feel safe when they're going out at night, especially women. And to improve the cycleways and the public transport, they're all things that can be done quite quickly, I feel, and have that immediate impact on people's lives. But climate is the main thing that we need to work on.
Sure, thank you, Jean. Des, I don't think we haven't come to you yet on this, have we?
No.
No, I'm just joking.
Love hearing the climate mentioned so much there, because the first time I spoke at a council meeting was at Kettering Borough Council's climate emergency declaration in July 2019. And since then, I've become increasingly interested and involved in trying to make positive change in my community. I've attended many council meetings and witnessed ridiculous situations where good ideas that would make real improvements for people were defeated because the opposition party presented them. Now, I've achieved a lot as a community activist, but I believe I can make even more of a difference as part of the council, and I want to be the first Green Party councillor to be elected to the unitary, with hopefully more to follow. If elected, I would not be whipped and could vote as I feel for the motions that will actually improve our society for residents. This new council is a great opportunity to move away from the stagnancy of the previous administration by bringing fresh new voices onto the council to represent the people of North Northamptonshire. I would push for the declaration of a climate emergency and adoption of the climate action plan created by the Shadow Authority at the earliest possible opportunity. Our councillors have dithered for too long with the excuse that the unitary authority is coming. Once it is here, we need to push ahead and take the lead from good initiatives already in progress by those councils who have already taken action on their climate emergency declarations.
Thank you, Des. The next question asks, how will you justify the consistently eye-watering council tax rises, and what am I going to get for my money? I think this is something that lots of people have been talking about over the last few weeks. Jean, could you perhaps start us off on this one, please?
I can't justify the increase. As you well know, Councillor Tom Beattie and I and others argued about the increases that were made in such a draconian manner when they could have been harmonised over 2 years, as Bournemouth and Christchurch did when they unified. So if we want good services, then we all have to contribute to those services. And I don't have a problem with that, so long as it's fair, and it has to be fair. As we've already said, there are some people in our communities that find it difficult to manage on a low budget. So why wouldn't you put something in place that helps them, especially this year in COVID, where people have lost their jobs and found it very difficult to manage? Why wouldn't you put something in place, even if it was just for 2 years, to help them over that hurdle? And why wouldn't you put a discretionary fund in place for those people that do get into difficulties? It would save money in the long term, because you wouldn't have to take people to court and all that goes with that. What will people get for their money? Well, under Labour, they'll get a lot more than they've had under the Tory regime in the past.
Thank you, Jean. Jim?
Thank you. Firstly, I think there needs to be an open and clear conversation about what services are important to people. In particular, people who find themselves in need of support in whatever way, from the safety net that a caring council and the people on this hustings tonight, we're all members of a caring council, and that is responsible for providing for those people who find things tough. You don't provide services without proper funding. Too often the idea that you can provide services to an increasing number of people with a reducing amount of income is simply misleading. Any one of us in our own families or our businesses knows that you have to fund things properly to survive. The county council actually realised that funding was not going to be sufficient and increased its council tax year on year to the maximum that the government would allow. And of course, the government did not allow us to go, or any council to go over a certain limit. So they did try and bridge the funding. Take the example of KBC, another Conservative run council, where they wanted as a political ploy to say, for 10 years, we have had 0 council tax increases. That is irresponsible, because anyone knows that simply inflation means that 0 takes away 2 or 3% a year from the services that you can offer. KBC then went away on a 100 million spending spree, which was only stopped by its own government, to buy buildings at low prices and then take the rental income in order to bridge the gap between what should have been the council tax increases. So eye-watering, I don't necessarily think so. But what we need is an honest conversation with people like the questioner to say, you need to increase taxes to a level that allows services to be provided. What I really felt and really upset me was that that was a political manoeuvre, and the money that it raised was always a risk. It was against the best interests of the auditors. And now in the COVID year, £300,000 has been lost from those £50 million worth of building rentals because of COVID. It was always the risk, and that's not a risk that should be placed upon members of the community and taxpayers.
Jim,
So from that point of view, we need to have an honest conversation and put the taxes up to a reasonable degree that provides the services, but be efficient too. Thank you.
Thank you. Des?
I don't agree with the rises, which have hit certain areas of the north more disproportionately to others. I do note, though, that 3% of that rise is for adult social care, which is an essential service. We need to ensure that the money raised is spent wisely and not inefficiently on outsourcing. From speaking to friends who work in the adult social care sector and the police, we are in the midst of a huge mental health crisis. Mental health services are already at breaking point and need so much more investment. These rises are very hard for many households who are already stretched thin due to the pandemic. I would back a hardship fund to help those struggling with their council tax bills who formerly benefited from the council tax reduction scheme. I know this motion was put forward by Stanbra but refused by the Shadow Authority. West Northamptonshire approved such a fund, so we in the north should have it too. And what are you going to get for your money? For me personally, I will work my hardest for the residents of Clover Hill and Kettering. I have worked incredibly hard in the community to get to this point and would hope that is obvious to those people who are considering voting for me. I would hold the council services to account, investigate and address problems personally to ensure the new authority is running efficiently and following up on all complaints. If successful, I'm very much looking forward to being a councillor and influencing the running of the council rather than just making suggestions as a member of the public. I would like to see more democratisation of the council with power given back to the residents, and will back not just a citizens' assembly on climate but more deliberative democracy overall. If elected, I will be working for the people, and I want them to have an easier way to contribute and have a direct impact to their council and the decisions it makes for them.
Thank you, Des. Chris, please.
Thanks. I can't justify eye-watering council tax rises, but I can try and explain them as best I can. So council tax is a regressive, unfair tax that should be abolished. For me, there's no doubt about that. But for now, we're stuck with it. And of course, the nature of taxation is that we all pay something into the pot and we all get something back out of it. We share the cost. Some people get more than others, but that's the nature of taxation. That's how it works. That said, the tax rises we're seeing at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, are a direct result of the complete failure of the Conservatives at Northamptonshire County Council to do what David Cameron advocated, which was to fix the roof while the sun was shining. In actual fact, for several years, what they did was not put up council tax at all, but at the same time failed absolutely to do the boring well, to quote somebody else. They failed to control council expenditure. They got embroiled in more and more outlandish schemes to balance the books. And when those schemes failed, the council was bankrupt. Thankfully, North Northamptonshire Council is on a sounder financial footing. We may need one more year of decent council tax increases, we may not. But after that, I hope more reasonable increases will be the order of the day, because the council will be properly embedded and efficiency savings will have been identified. There must be efficiency savings if you're basically putting 4.5 councils into one, and that ought to produce some expenditure, some leeway in the expenditure, which will mean lower council tax increases will be required in future. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I think we've got about 15 minutes left, so we're probably only going to get one more of our readers' questions in tonight, and then I can see that we've had a few submitted while we've been talking, so we'll move on to those, I think, after this last one. And so this person says, given the recent reports by Danny Kruger MP, can you detail how you might want to level up our communities? And are you planning to do this with the voluntary, community and social enterprise sector in North Northamptonshire? For people watching, this refers to a report that I believe was commissioned by the Prime Minister to look at ways that society can come together to support communities in the wake of the COVID crisis. Kind of touches a little bit on the big society ideas that I think David Cameron used to talk about, but the sort of a fresher approach. Jim, could you start us on this one, please?
Yes, thank you. I share a similar background to Danny Kruger, being brought up on a farm here in Northamptonshire in Braybrook. And like him, my ambition is to help make our local community stronger and more prosperous. The COVID pandemic has shown just how crucial support for our friends and neighbours is right within the community itself. It's far more likely that those in need of finding a more level society to live in will relate to voluntary organisations created and driven by their own friends and neighbours, the people living around them. There are so many organisations in the voluntary sector who have been starved of funding as a result of austerity measures forced on councils, who then simply passed the buck down the line and withdrew funding for voluntary organisations, both local ones and national. Too many to mention tonight, but organisations like Home Start, who enable families that are struggling to find their own way forwards in life. A great organisation for levelling up the life chances of families. Marlow House in Desborough, physical and mental support, taking out meals with Meals on Wheels for many older residents in towns and villages, funding withdrawn. Rothwell Citizens Welfare Committee, years looked after and cared for older generations in Rothwell, again trying to level out the disparity between those who have and those who don't. The centre at Maudsley, the brand new Maudsley village, just 20 years old, literally overnight rose up for their community and created a stop-off point, a food bank point for residents living within that village. So you don't have to be an old established town, you can be a brand new village to do that. So those organisations are replicated all the way across North Northamptonshire. The new council needs not to patronise, not to pat on the head voluntary organisations, but to respect that they are at the heart of what we do and that they can deliver for us, but shouldn't be used as a cheap alternative either. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Des?
I've been involved in many voluntary organisations and social enterprises at a grassroots level. In fact, one of my first volunteering roles was at Safe Until Daylight, the homeless shelter in Kettering. This showed me the power that people working together for good can really make a difference. Doing night shifts with the clients and the volunteers was a fantastic experience, which I would like to return to one day. It's important to me to actually be on the ground with the people I ideally want to help through being a counsellor. Given the necessary and wonderful pulling together of people and communities during the pandemic, it's great to see that this report recognises that and advocates returning power to local people who understand the important issues in their communities. We should be giving power to residents as a means for them to effect meaningful change through deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies. We should be trusting the people to make the decisions that will most affect them. We have seen with the response to the pandemic that people and communities are quite capable of self-organising to form their own mutual aid groups that came together and stepped into those helping roles that were needed. Social enterprises are an important and key part of this, with the newly launched North Northamptonshire Social Enterprise Network looking to pull together groups and community interest companies across the north. We need to encourage more social enterprises who are not driven by profit but for the betterment of our society.
Thank you, Des. Chris, please.
Thanks. So yeah, Danny Kruger, the Kruger report. That's, as you said, Danny Kruger, a Tory MP for Devizes in Leafy, Wiltshire, and also apparently son of Bake Off's Prue Leith, I read. And I have to say, I'm not really sure I want to implement a Tory levelling up, because that's all going to be all about helping yourself, and probably coupled with very little help from Her Majesty's government. So sure, yes, let's involve the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. They can do much to help. We all know that they deliver better value for every pound they spend than almost any other organisation can. So, but what we need for that is that they be properly resourced by a council and government that buys into the huge contribution that the sector can make. And for me, I'm afraid that's not a Tory-run council, and that's not a Tory-run government.
Thank you, Chris. Jean?
Oh, big society, levelling up, localism, where does it end? All the national parties have their little sayings, don't they? But it's what happens on the ground that really matters. We truly recognise the benefits of the voluntary sector. Their value to society has been further highlighted, as already said, during the pandemic, where many organisations, both national and local, have stepped up and supported our communities. We recognise, as stated in our manifesto, the funding uncertainties these organisations have suffered over the years and the impact it's had on the services that they've been able to provide throughout communities. So we would want to continue a small grant facility within the council, so the small organisations can apply for things that they want to do throughout the year. But we would also set up a £1 million opportunities fund to enable organisations to apply for grants and lottery funding. So often they need a bit of match funding to get that money through and to get them started. So we would support our local community volunteers in the community.
Thank you, Jean. So we've had a few questions come in from the audience. I don't think we're going to get time to get through many of them, unfortunately. And some of them sort of touching on things that we've perhaps discussed as the night's gone on. But one question that we've had says, during national lockdown, it became paramount for communities to have green spaces locally for exercise and mental health. Despite each council declaring climate emergencies, development plans for warehouses in Corby and Kettering seem to be on the increase. Where do councillors stand on this issue, or where do the candidates stand on this issue? Jean, would you like to start on this one?
Again, another complex question, because it's almost a chicken and egg, isn't it? People need jobs, people need houses, and more importantly, just as importantly, people need green space. As you know, in Corby, we're very proud of our green spaces and our woodlands, and last year we started working on rewilding or wildflowering roundabouts and places like that. But it's again trying to get that balance between housing, jobs, and the green environment.
Thank you. Des, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I've got special interest in this because obviously I'm part of the Save Weekly Hall Wood campaign, which is fighting against speculative warehousing applications to the north of Kettering. Now, as part of that planning, it says that they'll create 600 jobs, but with the coming changes to warehousing, more automation, and we'd question as to how many of those jobs it would actually create, and also they have low quality jobs. We need higher quality jobs in town centres, with more better industry, rather than just creating empty sheds on our green spaces. Our green spaces are precious, and they are not only to people, to wildlife, but as part of our fight against the climate crisis. Every time a tree is felled, every time the soil is disturbed, we are losing carbon capture, which is obviously very, very important. We need to keep those green spaces. And yes, while we're in the golden triangle of distribution, with all of our great transport links, we need to make sure that the warehouses that we have already are filled before we build new ones.
Thanks, Des. Chris?
Absolutely. Communities need those green spaces, and you've got to say, fantastic work being done by Des and his fellow campaigners in Kettering to bring, hopefully, a successful conclusion to their campaign to save Weekly Hall Wood. That said, Jean's right, we need jobs too. People want to work, people want to earn money, and warehouses do bring jobs. Now, you might argue that they don't bring enough jobs, and I think there's some merit in that argument. So it really depends where these things are being built. Weekly Hall Wood, probably not the right place, but there are several sites around North Northamptonshire that would be suitable, and they, if that's the development proposal that comes forward, then that's what should happen. But hopefully no one's going to propose to build a warehouse on the playing fields here at Danesholme or on the playing fields at Oakley Vale, and I sincerely hope that would never happen if anyone did want to, because those are the sorts of green spaces we need to protect, the ones that are actually within the communities that people can access just by going out of their front door, crossing the street, and there they are. So let's protect those.
Thanks, Chris. Jim?
Absolutely, the jobs are required, but the core problem here is that the government, the Conservative government, said to councils, the more business rates you can achieve locally, the more money you will have in terms of increase. The quickest way and the dirtiest way, so to speak, was to have warehouses on the junction 8 of the A14 going to Northampton, where the new Costa is. I shouldn't probably advertise, but there you'll see a large number of warehouses. 10 years ago, we had a lovely development there, a hotel, small offices, just one warehouse and smaller units. But basically the government said, the more rates you can pull in, the more money you will keep. And the Conservative administration at KBC embraced that. I'd also say that there are places within towns where, like the local pollinator strategy that we worked through and I chaired 5 or 6 years ago, KBC has done nothing to actually implement that or to carry out the things that the executive said. So what we need is more doing and not more talking.
Thank you, Jim. We're approaching 7 o'clock, so we will start to wind up. A huge thank you to everyone on the panel that's taken part. We really appreciate you taking the time to answer the questions from our readers, and thank you to everyone that joined us. Just a quick reminder that if you're not already signed up to the NN Journal, you can subscribe at www.nnjournal.co.uk. We'll be having lots more election coverage in the coming days and weeks, and we will have live coverage of the count on May the 6th and May the 7th as votes are counted. So thank everyone for coming, and like I say, I hope you sign up and get more of our coverage. Thank you.
Can I just say, as one of the candidates, thank you for your scrutiny.
Yeah.
You must keep scrutinising us and doing things like this, and thank you for arranging it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much.
Bye-bye.